Alright, so it's kind of crazy to think. 29 months. Don't really think there's an anniversary for such a number, but at the same time, it feels like a pretty big milestone. I've probably mentioned it in some of my other videos, but I feel like I've gotten to the point where basically wherever I walk past a mirror, I just basically have to stop and go, oh wow, you look really nice today. Even when I'm not feeling my best, I feel like I can still count on a beautiful reflection. Something I definitely didn't have before because most of the time I just avoided mirrors. There was a disconnect. And quite frankly, I did not like what I was seeing. But now I do. And it's fantastic. But as for things specifically this month, well, I actually have a bit of a fun story for you. So you may remember last month that I bumped into one of 3 siblings that I went to Boy Scouts with. Well, this month I bumped into the oldest sibling at the bank. So I figure by this point, I'll probably be bumping into the second sibling in another week or so. We'll see, but I just thought that was a crazy coincidence, and since I mentioned it in the last video, I wanted to mention it here as well. For the most part, I would say this has been more of a philosophical month. There is one important thing I want to mention on the physical side. I'm starting to get a few zits here and there. There was one here a few days ago, and then there was one here starting this morning. I'm not really sure if it's coming up on the camera, but this brings up an interesting point I don't think I've ever brought up before, and that's the idea of noticing that my skin is very different now. Before, it used to be very greasy, and because of this, I had a lot of acne when I was going through the first puberty. But now, my skin is a lot softer and has a tendency to dry out a little more. Like, specifically my hands, it seems like the knuckles like to crack, or even up in here. Basically, wherever there's a crease, if the heater's been running a lot, it seems like my hands have an easier tendency to bleed now. And yes, I do know there's moisturizers for such things, but, well, I'm constantly washing my hands because it's cold and flu season, and in doing so, I often wash off the hand cream that I applied in the first place, so it's just a vicious cycle. When it comes to the philosophical questions, though, maybe it's just the way I was raised, or maybe this is a quote-unquote way all men are raised, but I have a very hard time asking for help from anyone. That was always a sign of weakness before, and such a thing would be ridiculed either by friends or family, and so I've just kind of learned to figure out how to do it myself. But in trying to get everything in order for bottom surgery, I find this is one of those things that I really can't do by myself. I would have figured I'd be fine, like after I get the surgery, that I'd be able to stay alone for a while, but then the therapist kind of brought up the idea that such a thing could be quite traumatizing to be completely left alone with. Like a good example I could think of is when I caught COVID, and that was at the time where the quarantine cycle was for 14 days. And the problem there is I only had maybe like a week's worth of food, so I needed help. And luckily there was a few people I could call in order to get some groceries and other things like that. And so I'm gonna have to start swallowing my pride on this one to be able to ask for food, for company, for just other things that I just have never been comfortable in asking for. But at the same time, I think it's gotten better. Like, as soon as I realized that I would definitely need friends or somebody to check in on me after a while, I took this question right to my friends. Basically just asking them outright, I'm gonna need help. Can you send me groceries? Can you keep me company for a day or two? And as of now, I really can't give an exact date as to when it's gonna happen, but I'm just happy that they're gonna be there for me. And I would have never been able to ask for such a thing before I even went through any of this. So it's interesting that there's physical changes, sure, as well as like changing your name legally and stuff like that. But I feel like there's a lot of philosophical changes as well. Like a big example I can think of is society as a whole. There's specific ways that men are supposed to act and women are supposed to act. When you're born as one and you're transitioning to the other, you really start to pick up on what is supposed to be this and what is supposed to be that. And I'm not trying to be controversial by leaving out anybody that's in the middle. In fact, I feel like such a thing would be quite complicated. And even worse than that is if your gender identity exists outside of those two and not a mixture of those two. So you pretty much have to invent your own rules as to how this particular gender is supposed to act. But I don't want to get too much deeper than that, because such things are quite hot topics these days. There is one other philosophical thing I want to talk about as well. At least I think this is more of a philosophical thing. So, one exercise that my therapist wanted to go over was the idea of like stuff that my child self wanted that I just couldn't have, either because it was gendered as female, because my parents just simply wouldn't allow it, or other stuff like that. And in order to get back into that mindset, there was a little exercise to try to figure out what your mindset was at that time. Which this is something that's been easy for me to do. Without getting too crazy into the details, let's just say I had a bad childhood, and I just kept most of those very bitter, painful memories close to me. I felt like I kind of got strength from it in a ways. And part of me has also been the person that likes to hold a grudge. I figure with this information I'll be able to get my revenge somehow. But while it's interesting that I can get into the mindset of where I was when I was a child, it is now being obscured by what my standards as well as other little things are now. Like, as I was thinking back to being a child, part of me wanted to experience what it was like to play in a dress or to be able to do other very feminine things. But I know by putting myself in that mindset of when I was 5 years old, that 5-year-old me would have absolutely hated that. And just in case I haven't mentioned it before, I actually used to have very long hair when I was really young. It was probably about preschool that I just said, no, I can't stand it anymore, have it cut off. I don't think I had it this long, for instance, probably like to about here, I would wager. But it's times I think about that. Is it so much that maybe society got to me and I was overcompensating by trying to be as masculine as I could think about it? Or did I just not legitimately like the long hair? And another fun instance I always think about back in elementary school, we were having like this big outdoor picnic. I can distinctly remember there was just this group of girls, maybe like 5 or 6, that captured me, and then they forced me to put on black nail polish. It's always weird when I think back to that time, because being the kid that I was, I found such a thing very, like, disturbing, devastating. I'm like, get it off, no! Yet as of now, I love that stuff. So it kind of brings about this idea of, like, is my present self kind of muddying the memories of the past? Because I know who I want to be now. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily the person I was before. But then again, when I was a kid, I was just told I was a boy. I had no reason to question it. I just went to the men's room and I just was. It was just like a few little things here and there that felt a little off. It's just weird whenever I think back, because back then it very much felt like I was cis. I had no problem with being a little boy, whatsoever. It was just, I didn't like being a man. I absolutely hated it. I wondered what was going on. All the changes that I got, I was hoping there would be something else, and then it just ended up being incredibly disappointed. And now that I'm getting the changes that I want, I'm very happy. But once again, this seems like very in stark contrast to the little boy and the woman of now. Think about that as like the store brand of Philosophy Tube. I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot of good things. That's really about it. There is just one last thing I want to mention, though. So this is a little bit of a sneak peek into the 30th month, but I figure this is still pretty important to mention anyway. So it was the weirdest thing. The day before I recorded this, I was just having these random chest pains, and I know what you're thinking. It's like, no, it's not that kind of chest pain. I know what that is like. It felt more like heartburn or something like that. And I'm not gonna lie, the whole time I was very much freaking out. Because the idea of heart problems would bar the idea of any surgery within the future. And on top of that, well, I've kind of gotten to a point in my life where I want to live. So I try to be very cautious. I'm all about exercise, vegetables, fruits, all the stuff to have a healthy body. Not to be like I didn't care so much before, but I really care about it now. So after about an hour or so, I decided to go to urgent care to figure it out. And that was quite an adventure, really. Probably the main things I will note for now. So, one of the nurses I met with, their partner was also trans. So the idea that me looking like this, and unfortunately having this deep of a voice, didn't really seem too out of the ordinary, which is nice. And then the other big thing is, like, there was a lot of times I had to strip for examinations and stuff like that. And I realized that I'm very comfortable in my own body as of now. Like, if I'm in a doctor's office, I'll just strip and I'll be like, yeah, so you see anything out of the ordinary? I'm not very shy about that anymore. But yet the fun thing is, I had to hurry up and get all my clothes together to get transferred into another department, and at that point I didn't have enough time to put my bra on. Now I was wearing a rather tight t-shirt at the time, and I just felt very exposed. So part of me was like very shy about it. And once again, it just kind of goes into like the duality of who I am, I guess. But the other reason I bring this up in the first place is that after all the tests, I realized I don't have COVID, and I didn't have any sort of heart issues. Instead, it looked like it was the beginnings of bronchitis, which in a ways I was pretty happy about, because bronchitis is something I can deal with. It's something that can heal. It's something that's not going to bar the chance for me to have surgery. If I sound a little weird, or if I have like a tendency to ramble, or if I look kind of sickly, it's because I am, and I wanted to give you the basic idea as to why. I could definitely say I'm doing a lot better than yesterday, but I'm probably maybe at like 45% capacity as opposed to say the 85 or 95 I feel most days. That is all I have for now. If there's anything else you'd like to talk about, feel free to leave a comment and I will get back to you. And as always, if it has anything to do with politics, do not ask. I will not answer. It's just getting a little too fierce these days to be able to talk about such things online. So, till next time, be yourself, no matter who that is.